December 24th, 2002. What should have been a peaceful Christmas Eve turned into a nightmare for the Peterson family. Lassie Peterson, a 27-year-old mother-to-be, went missing in Modesto, California. Her disappearance would soon captivate the nation, unraveling a tale of betrayal, deception, and murder that remains controversial even today. The media frenzy began almost immediately, with Lassai's face plastered across every news outlet. She was young, vibrant, and just weeks away from giving birth to her first child, a boy she planned to name Connor. The story of a pregnant woman vanishing on Christmas Eve struck a chord with the public, turning what could have been a local missing person case into a national obsession. But as days passed with no sign of Lassie, attention quickly shifted to her husband, Scott Peterson. His calm demeanor during interviews, which at first appeared to be composure in the face of tragedy, soon led to suspicion. The media began to question Scott's involvement, and whispers of infidelity and deception began to circulate. This case, which started as a heartbreaking story of a missing wife and mother, soon spiraled into a narrative filled with intrigue, media scrutiny, and a nation divided over Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence. The disappearance of Lassie Peterson became more than just a true crime. It became a reflection of a society's fascination with mystery, scandal, and the search for justice. Lassie Peterson was last seen alive on the morning of December 24th, 2002. She was 7.5 months pregnant with her first child, a boy she planned to name Connor. That morning, she had planned to take their dog for a walk in their Modesto neighborhood, while her husband, Scott Peterson, prepared to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina about 90 miles away. When Scott returned home that afternoon, he found their dog, Mackenzie, wandering in the yard with its leash still attached, but Lassie was nowhere to be found. Scott called Lassie's mother, Sharon Rocha, asking if Lassie was with her. When she said no, panic set in, and the family immediately contacted the Modesto Police Department to report Lassie missing. The search for Lassie Peterson began that same day and quickly escalated as it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Family, friends, and volunteers scoured the neighborhood, handed out flyers, and coordinated with the police to cover as much ground as possible. Within days, the case had attracted national media attention. News vans lined the streets of Modesto, and Lassai's face became a fixture on TV screens across the country. The public was captivated by the story of the missing pregnant woman, and the search efforts grew in scale, with helicopters, divers, and search dogs brought in to aid in the hunt. The Modesto Police Department worked tirelessly, but as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, hope began to wane. Despite the extensive search, no trace of Lassie was found. The pressure mounted on the investigators, who were now operating under the increasing scrutiny of the national media and the public. As the investigation continued, the focus began to shift, leading to suspicions that would soon take the case in a much darker direction. As the investigation progressed, suspicion began to fall on Scott Peterson. Evidence slowly emerged, casting a dark shadow over the grieving husband. One of the most critical pieces of evidence was the boat Scott had purchased just weeks before Lassie's disappearance. Authorities believed that he used this small aluminum fishing boat to dispose of Lassie's body in the deep waters of the San Francisco Bay, a theory that would become central to the prosecution's case. In Scott's storage unit, investigators discovered several homemade concrete anchors. These anchors were highly suspicious, as they seemed to serve no practical purpose for someone using a small fishing boat. The prosecution argued that Scott used these anchors to weigh down Lassie's body in the bay, ensuring it would never surface. Adding to the growing suspicion, forensic analysis revealed that a single hair found on a pair of pliers in Scott's boat matched Lassie's DNA. This piece of evidence, while circumstantial, added to the narrative that Scott had transported Lassie's body using the boat. Investigators also meticulously tracked Scott's phone records and movements on the day of Lassie's disappearance. The data showed that Scott had made several calls from the Berkeley Marina where he claimed to have been fishing. His alibi, however, was riddled with inconsistencies. For instance, Scott initially told police that he had gone fishing for sturgeon, a claim that raised eyebrows because sturgeon fishing typically occurs at a different time of year. Furthermore, Scott's demeanor throughout the investigation, calm, detached, and at times seemingly indifferent, fueled public and police suspicion alike. As the investigation continued, the focus on Scott Peterson intensified, with the evidence painting a picture of a man who was not just a grieving husband, but potentially a calculating murderer. The combination of circumstantial evidence, inconsistent alibis, and Scott's suspicious behavior would soon culminate in a criminal trial that captivated the nation. The case took a dramatic turn when a woman named Amber Frey came forward, revealing that she had been having an affair with Scott Peterson. Amber had no idea that Scott was married, let alone that his wife was missing. Her revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation and the public, drastically altering the perception of Scott Peterson from a concerned husband to a possible manipulator. Amber Frey, a single mother working as a massage therapist, met Scott Peterson in November 2002, just a month before Lassai's disappearance. Scott presented himself as a bachelor, and the two quickly became romantically involved. It wasn't until after Lassai went missing that Amber saw Scott's face on the news and realized the man she was dating was at the center of a national tragedy. In January 2003, Amber contacted the Modesto Police Department and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. She began recording her phone conversations with Scott, who continued to deceive her even as the search for Lassai intensified. In one of the most infamous calls, Scott told Amber he was in Paris celebrating New Year's Eve when, in reality, he was attending a vigil for Lassai in Modesto. This blatant lie not only exposed Scott's duplicity, but also further incriminated him in the eyes of the public and law enforcement. The recorded phone calls between Amber and Scott were later played in court, becoming a pivotal part of the prosecution's case. In these calls, Scott's attempts to maintain his double life were laid bare, showing a man who was not only unfaithful, but also willing to continue his affair even as his wife and unborn child were missing. Amber's testimony and the recordings shattered any remaining image of Scott as a grieving husband, painting him instead as a man capable of cold deception. Amber Frey's involvement in the case turned the investigation on its head and became one of the most talked about aspects of the trial. Her bravery in coming forward added a new dimension to the narrative, one that would prove crucial in the eventual conviction of Scott Peterson. On April 14, 2003, nearly 4 months after Lassai's disappearance, the remains of a woman and a male fetus were discovered along the shore of the San Francisco Bay. The discovery was made by a couple walking their dog near the Richmond shoreline, an area that had been of particular interest to investigators due to Scott Peterson's alibi of fishing in the bay on the day Lassai went missing. The bodies were found in a state of advanced decomposition. The male fetus, later identified as Connor, was found first, partially intact with the umbilical cord still attached. Just a day later, the torso of a woman, missing its head and limbs, was discovered not far from where Connor had been found. Although the remains were severely deteriorated, DNA tests confirmed the worst fears Lassai Peterson and her unborn son Connor had been found. This discovery would be the turning point in the case, leading directly to Scott Peterson's arrest. The remains were located in the exact area where Scott had claimed to be fishing, which only added to the suspicions against him. Forensic analysis played a crucial role in this case. The remains were subjected to extensive testing, including DNA analysis, which confirmed their identities. Additionally, experts examined the tidal patterns in the San Francisco Bay, which suggested that the bodies could have drifted from the location where Scott had been fishing. This scientific evidence supported the theory that Scott had indeed disposed of Lassai's body in the bay, using the boat he had purchased weeks before her disappearance. The discovery of the bodies was a devastating blow to Lassai's family, who had held out hope that she might still be alive. It also provided the prosecution with the crucial physical evidence they needed to charge Scott Peterson with murder. The case, which had captivated the nation from the start, now had its grim conclusion, setting the stage for one of the most sensational trials in American history. On November 12, 2004, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder for Lassai's death and second-degree murder for the death of Connor. The verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the nation. Lassai's family, who had been present throughout the grueling trial, broke down in tears as the verdict was read, overwhelmed with a mix of relief and sorrow. They had lost Lassai and Connor, but now at least they had a measure of justice. Scott Peterson remained emotionless as the verdict was delivered, a stark contrast to the emotional outpouring from Lassai's family and the public. The case had drawn intense media coverage, and the conviction was met with widespread approval from a public that had largely already made up its mind about Scott's guilt. However, the death sentence that followed soon after sparked both relief and outrage across the nation. While many believed that Scott deserved the ultimate punishment for his crimes, others questioned the fairness of the trial and the influence of media coverage on the outcome. The sentencing phase of the trial saw Scott Peterson sentenced to death by lethal injection, a decision that was met with applause from some in the courtroom. The judge, in delivering the sentence, remarked on the cruelty and premeditation of Scott's actions, describing them as cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. The sentencing brought a sense of closure for some, but for others it marked the beginning of a long legal battle. Scott Peterson's legal team immediately began the appeals process, arguing that the trial had been tainted by juror misconduct, improper handling of evidence, and the overwhelming media coverage that had turned public opinion against Scott from the start. These appeals have kept the case in the public eye for years, with Scott continuing to maintain his innocence. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, citing significant errors in jury selection during the original trial. This decision reignited debates about Scott's guilt and whether he had received a fair trial. Lassai's family, though initially relieved by the conviction, has had to endure years of legal wrangling as Scott's appeals continue. The ongoing legal battles have prevented them from fully moving on, as the case remains a point of contention in the public sphere. The impact of the verdict and sentencing has been profound, not just on Lassai's family, but on the American legal system and public perception of justice. The Scott Peterson case remains a complex and controversial chapter in true crime history, highlighting the difficulties in balancing justice with the influence of media and public opinion. Despite his conviction, Scott Peterson has maintained his innocence, leading to a series of appeals that have kept the case alive in the public's mind. His defense team has argued that the trial was fundamentally flawed, pointing to issues like juror misconduct and the overwhelming influence of media coverage, which they claim tainted the jury pool and denied Scott a fair trial. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, citing significant errors in jury selection during his original trial. The court found that potential jurors had been improperly dismissed because they expressed general objections to the death penalty, even though they had also indicated they would be willing to impose it in accordance with the law. This decision reignited the debate over Scott's guilt, with some viewing the ruling as a step towards a possible retrial, while others saw it as a technicality that did not undermine the guilty verdict. The appeals process has brought forward new arguments from Scott's defense team, including claims of juror misconduct. They allege that one juror, in particular, failed to disclose her own history of domestic abuse and legal battles during jury selection, which could have biased her against Scott. The defense has also highlighted potential new evidence that they argue could exonerate Scott, including witness statements and forensic analysis that were not considered during the original trial. The Los Angeles Innocence Project has also taken an interest in the case, advocating for a re-examination of the evidence. They argue that the circumstantial nature of the evidence against Scott, combined with the possibility of alternative explanations for Lassai's disappearance, warrants a closer look. Their involvement has added further complexity to an already contentious case, with some seeing their efforts as a genuine pursuit of justice, while others view it as an unnecessary reopening of old wounds. The Scott Peterson case is a prime example of how media coverage can influence public perception. From the very beginning, the media portrayed Scott as the villain, with his every move scrutinized and dissected by both the press and the public. This early portrayal likely played a role in shaping the narrative of his guilt long before the trial even began. Over the years, however, some have questioned whether Scott received a fair trial given the intense media scrutiny. True crime documentaries such as American Murder, Lassie Peterson have revisited the case, exploring the possibility that Scott may not have received an impartial trial. These documentaries often present the evidence in a way that encourages viewers to reconsider the case, sometimes highlighting aspects that were downplayed or ignored during the trial. Social media has also played a significant role in keeping the case relevant. Online forums, blogs, and discussion groups continue to debate Scott's guilt or innocence, with some users passionately defending him while others remain convinced of his guilt. The internet has allowed the case to remain in the public consciousness, with new generations discovering it and forming their own opinions based on the available information. The role of media and public perception in the Scott Peterson case cannot be overstated. It serves as a reminder of the powerful impact that media coverage can have on legal proceedings and public opinion, sometimes blurring the lines between justice and sensationalism. The Lasai Peterson case is more than just a tragic story. It's a case that has left an indelible mark on American society. It has raised important questions about justice, media influence, and the power of public opinion. The case has become a touchstone in discussions about how the media can shape narratives, sometimes to the detriment of the accused, and how the legal system must navigate these influences to ensure a fair trial. As we continue to revisit this case, one thing is certain: the search for the truth and for justice for Lasai and Connor will never be forgotten. The ongoing debates, the legal battles, and the public's continued interest all point to a case that remains unresolved in the minds of many, even years after the verdict. The legacy of the Lasai Peterson case will likely continue to be debated for years to come, serving as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of media influence and a compelling narrative about the pursuit of justice in the face of tragedy. If you found this video informative, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into true crime cases. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Scott Peterson case. Do you believe he's guilty or innocent? And what case should we cover next? Your feedback is invaluable.